The title of this thesis is Reasonable Doubt, Social Cognition and the West Memphis Three. The central question in this investigation was how do unconscious cognitive processes interfere with justice? To answer this question, a criminal case from the 1990s was examined. This case takes place during the Satanic Panic, which was a period during the 80s and 90s when many people believed satanic cults were operating in the shadows and abusing children. The spread of panic was aided by law enforcement task forces. Baseless rumors flooded communities and sowed divisions. The widespread hysteria led to what would be a perfect storm about to hit the town of West Memphis, Arkansas. On the evening of May 5th in 1993, 8-year-olds Steve Branch, Michael Moore, and Christopher Byers had gone out for a bike ride and were reported missing when they did not return home. Their bodies were unfortunately recovered the next day in a drainage ditch in the Robin Hood Hills area, which is a forested area along Interstate 40. All 3 boys had severe injuries all over their bodies and had been hogtied with shoelaces. This crime occurred at a time when the West Memphis Police Department was already under an enormous amount of pressure as Arkansas State Police were investigating them for embezzlement, stolen confiscated funds, and drug-related activity. This case would have been major news in any big city, but for this small town, it was colossal. Local news stations covering the investigation reported that it appeared that satanic cult activity wasn't involved in the murders and that people all over West Memphis were coming forward with stories of satanic cults. The narrative of satanic ritual abuse's involvement in the murders was aided by the West Memphis PD's statements on the investigation. Rumors continued to spread and were magnified as the case gained national attention. Teenagers Damien Echols, Jason Baldwin, and Jessie Misskelly became suspects and were later convicted of this crime. Misskelly and Baldwin were sentenced to life in prison while Echols was sentenced to death. Echols became the focus of the investigation due to his black sheep status in this widely religious community. Echols wore dark clothing, loved rock music, wrote dark poetry, and had expressed interest in the pagan tradition of Wicca, a religion commonly misconceived as Satanism. Echols was not a Satanist, but was viewed as an active satanic cult member because of his physical appearance and personal interests. His close friend Jason Baldwin became a suspect sheerly by association and similar interests. Police lacked any concrete evidence linking Echols or Baldwin to the crime, but were completely convinced that they were responsible, even when they had other leads and physical evidence that should have turned their investigation in another direction. With nothing on them, they couldn't arrest Echols and Baldwin until they secured what was a false confession from an intellectually disabled teen, Jessie Misskelly. The false confession implicated all 3 of them in the crime. These 3 became known as the West Memphis Three, who served almost 2 decades in prison before they would be released through an Alford plea. DNA evidence has since ruled them out. The case against the West Memphis Three lacked the sufficient evidence that should have been required for the convictions. An exploration of social cognition will reveal why the West Memphis Three became suspects and how the burden of proof was easily avoided when their guilt became the gospel truth. The case of the West Memphis Three serves as a prime example of how unconscious cognitive processes interfere with justice. Research involving the dual process model of cognition, schemas, attribution, impression formation, heuristics, and cognitive bias were explored. Each theory studied within social cognition was applied to the case of the West Memphis Three to demonstrate how unconscious cognitive processes interfered with the investigation and led to convictions. Confirmation bias occurs when our beliefs overlap with some of the evidence available. Evidence that does not overlap with our beliefs is then effectively ignored. This overlap confirms our bias and strengthens the durability of false hypotheses. Justice attempts to prove a theory, but in doing so allows the definition of evidence to include subjective material. If proof includes subjective material, then the burden of proof is not burdensome. Justice pursues not only what can be proven, but what also can be believed. This poses a very important question. Can we see the world as it is if it doesn't always align with what we believe to be true? An unfortunate truth about the process of justice is that it has very little room for error, yet countless opportunities to occur. These errors are not inconsequential and have major repercussions. An analysis of past and present research on social cognition has provided clarity in several areas. First, research conducted on social cognition is highly applicable to the processes of justice. Investigations prompt the solving of puzzles, often with missing pieces. Second, there is a myriad of research available that can be used to inform how the processes of justice are carried out. And third, there is more work to be done. Possible further research should include an exploration of how bias is prevented and how the scientific method can be integrated into the investigative process.